Welcome back to the 1-0 Sports Show. We're here with Brooks Kubena.
Kubena.
I got that right this time.
Kubena? Did we get it right?
Let's just give up.
Let's give up on it. But anyway,
I'm Brooks. You can call me Brooks.
Okay.
There we go. We got Brooks on the show. And Brooks, you're a former Texas student media legend. You did it all here. But what's it like to be back here at TSTV, back on set?
Well, it's good to be called a legend. That's completely false. But it's great. I mean, I remember being here just in the same chairs that you guys are in. This table is still going strong, I see. But man, it's just, going back to my old stomping ground, seeing a lot of things. I really value this. I think this is a good chance for you guys to learn what you do. I got to watch your block the first time, and I had some arguments. Y'all had me going. So no, I'm glad that this is still an institution where students can come in and learn, because this is a heck of an experience, and I'm glad to be a part of it as much as I can be for y'all today.
Yeah, you did TSTV when you were at UT. You're now in print. So this is kind of the big question that I think people tune in to get. What's the better type of journalism, broadcast or print?
Well, they each have their own strengths, obviously. I like what TV does, and you can do different things visually and telling a story. I was drawn to print because at a young age, that's what I did. I wrote. It was also out of college the first job that I got an offer for. So you take it where you get it. Yeah. And I'm just running that ball as far as I can. So I enjoy the written word. I think there's a lot of analysis that you can do, a lot of things that you can go behind the scenes and not quite do if you had to carry a camera around. And I think sometimes you can get more authenticity when you're sitting someone in their house and not having to look into the camera sometimes. But there's also some strengths to being able to go on television, and I think they both have their strengths for sure.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into kind of some of the LSU Texas matchup. So I read the piece you had for The Advocate, in which you detailed the history of Caleb Chasen. I'm getting some name issues today. Caleb Chasen and Sam Ehlinger. So I mean, how much do you think that that's going to be a part of this game? And because it's something kind of out of a movie when you go and read the story. Well,
yeah, I mean, so background, I used to do radio broadcasts as well. So that game, the state title game in 2015 between Westlake and North Shore, I was on the broadcast for that, and it was one of the wildest state championship games in the history of Texas high school football. And people still debate whether that North Shore defense is the best that there ever was. And Caleb Chasen was actually he didn't play. I mean, he didn't practice that whole week leading up to that game. His arm was actually in a sling. He had a collarbone issue, and he didn't want to mess with it before the game. But he went in there. He had, I think, a sack and a half in that game. And in overtime, Westlake was down 7, and they tried to run a sweep wide receiver pass. And Caleb was just waiting for it in the backfield and stripped the ball, and game was over. But it went back and forth the entire way. And we did a bit of an oral history on that for The Advocate. And I thought it turned out pretty well. And I'm glad that it reached you. I'm glad to have you as a reader. But this does highlight one of the biggest parts of this game is Caleb missed the season last year. Had a ACL tear in the first week of the season against Miami. They missed him throughout the entire season. They could not establish a good pass rush the rest of the year, talking about LSU. And now that he's back, they're going to be more dangerous. This guy could possibly become a first-round pick in the NFL. He's fast. He's strong. They think he can break the LSU single-season sack record. And with Sam's ability to run, he's going to be one of those guys that is going to be there to contain him. So that will be one of the biggest matchups to look for in Saturday, and it would be that way even without their interesting history.
Yeah, and you obviously study LSU and just watch LSU a lot more than we do. How worried should Texas be about LSU coming in on Saturday?
Texas is the underdog,
right?
And by some S&P Plus numbers, 2 touchdown underdogs. I think when Texas's offense is looking at this, there are legitimately in the secondary for LSU 4 guys that could eventually be top 50 picks in the NFL draft. I don't think that's something Sam Ehlinger has seen I think with the depth y'all talked about at running back, there is an issue there. LSU has 4 linebackers on the Butkus Award watch list. The defensive line is much stronger than it was last year, and I think in this environment, Texas is going to be tested like they haven't been tested before. I'm not going to say that they can't win in this game. I think it's going to be closer than some S&P Plus numbers say, but for sure, like it is a situation where this is LSU's most talented team they've fielded in quite some time.
Yeah. So on the flip side, what is LSU worried about looking at the Texas team?
I think that they, LSU's offense is still running pretty smoothly. It went 5 touchdowns in a row to start the game last week. I think what LSU is trying to figure out is how well it can work against Power 5 defenses. I think the defensive line for Texas is fairly good. Malcolm Roach, actually a Baton Rouge guy that did not get offered. He's got a chip on his shoulder in this game, wants to play very well. I think how Texas's defense is going to muddy up their signals for the run-pass option offense. I think when you look at Todd Orlando, he does a lot of the same things that Dave Aranda does, and he mixes up the defense, rotates safeties in. He's got a package called Cowboy where there's eight safeties on the field at once, and it just messes up your signals, and you don't know what's dropping and what's coming. And when you're running the run-pass option, you have to identify keys as to what you're reading. So that can muddy up some things, and I think this will be the first ultimate test for this offense, and with Orlando being as creative as he is, it'll be about how well they're going to make adjustments throughout the game.
Yeah, so Brooks, you're obviously super knowledgeable about LSU. Who's one player from LSU that, us here in like non-SEC land don't really think about, but that he could wreak havoc on Saturday?
So if you're familiar with recruiting, you probably have heard this guy's name, Derrick Stingley. He was the #1 overall recruit from last season. He's thought to be the youngest player to ever practice with LSU. He graduated early and actually practiced with the team at home, which you're allowed to do during the Fiesta Bowl last year. So he was practicing in December. And Dave Aranda actually told us, and he's not one to really lie, he said that he was the best, he looked like the best cornerback on the field. Ed Ogeron has compared his skills, he's a punt returner as well, to Reggie Bush. And we've seen, I'm not saying he's Reggie Bush, but he certainly has the talent. He got 55 yards in punt return yards last week, and that's more than half that the team had the entire season in 2018. It was miserable for them last year. So he's changed that. He intercepted Joe Burrow in the spring game. He played he's a starter already. He's got a big background in his family. His grandpa was actually if you might have heard his name, Derrick Stingley. He was the one who was paralyzed in the hit by Jack Tatum on the Oakland Raiders. And his dad actually played pro baseball and football as well. If it was like LeBron era and draft abilities and they could draft out of high school, I don't think it would be silly to say Derrick Stingley would have been selected out of high school. He's a very talented guy, and I know Texas wide receiver depth is there, but Derrick Stingley is definitely someone people will need to keep an eye on in this game.
Yeah. On another note, do you eventually start to understand Ed Orgeron the more that you cover LSU?
I think it's one of those things. He definitely is understandable. You go there. I think it's something from the outside that's kind of funny, and you hear. But he's definitely a person who communicates well, and I've never had a problem with it ever since I went in.
Let's talk about Joe Burrow for a second, because we said this in the last block, but LSU finally has a quarterback. It's just weird for me to process, but is he actually going to do it? Is he actually going to be the LSU quarterback who can throw and can maybe take him to a title game?
I think Joe Burrow proved that last year. Throughout the year, I mean, he set the school record for most consecutive games without an interception, and they gave him a lot more responsibility as the year went on. He was able to call audibles at the line of scrimmage. He was able to change plays and communicate with the offensive coaches. And this was in a limited offense. They had a rotating door on the offensive line. They didn't have a consistent starting lineup until week 7 against Georgia. They had one tight end, really, and they weren't using their wide receivers in the way that makes them the most talented. And they totally revamped their offense and said, you know what, Joe Burrow is a smart quarterback who has run the run-pass option ever since he was 15, and he's got the abilities that we already trusted him with. Let's build an offense around him, and that's what they did. They brought in Joe Brady, who was an assistant on the New Orleans Saints staff, and he brought in his spread schemes, and he was also one of the guys that learned from Joe Moorhead, who was the head coach at Mississippi State. He was the guy that crafted the RPO first at Fordham and then with Penn State whenever they made all their records on the offensive side. So he's put all that into the LSU offense, and just seeing it last week click like it did, even if it was against Georgia Southern, you can see that Joe Burrow is very comfortable in this. And the revolving door of quarterbacks, the shaky quarterback history at LSU is over because of him, and it's clear to see that. And it's a lot of people who have been around the program for a long time see a very high ceiling for the offense because of Joe Burrow.
Yeah, on that side of the ball, how do you think Texas's Cowboy Package is going to fare this week, especially because Joe Burrow is so talented?
I think Burrow is a exceptional quarterback out of understanding and reading defenses. I think he's seen a lot of these styles of defenses, and one of them is in his own backyard. I think Dave Aranda and Todd Orlando are very much of the same kind of style. So Joe understands how a team is supposed to mess with his signals. LSU has a system where they use 7 defensive backs on the field at once, and that was kind of a thing I wanted to ask Todd about. What's the difference between a 7th and an 8th guy? And it can be substantial.
Yeah.
It can be substantial, and if the depth is there, I think there's still a lot of questions about this Texas secondary, especially after giving up 300 yards to Louisiana Tech. But there is talent there, and I think Joe Burrow has proven that he's good at communicating both with his coaching staff and the players in the backfield and telling them which keys to read. So it's certainly something to look for.
And this is an important question. You've covered Texas, you've covered LSU. Who is the real DBU? And don't say Florida, please.
Well, I find it interesting that Texas brings up the DBU thing, and it's kind of one of those things that doesn't really matter.
Oh yeah, no, not at all.
But
not at all.
If we're looking at pure numbers for defensive backs, I just said earlier, and I'm just saying this from an objective, fact-based thing. LSU has 4 guys who will probably be top 50 NFL picks in the secondary. Greedy Williams was picked last year. Texas hasn't produced that within the past 5 years, really. The last guys that you can think of that were actually elite guys, I think DBU really was part of that time where you had guys like Nathan Vasher, and then up until Earl Thomas, and then Kenny Vaccaro was kind of that last guy who, really proved that he could be elite on the field. And, now Caden Stern seems like he's one of those guys who can possibly bring that back. But defensive secondary has been an issue at Texas within the last 5 years, and Texas hasn't been great on the football field either. So I think Tom Herman had the perfect answer when he was asked about that. If they're going to wear the shirts and it makes them better, go ahead and wear it. But if we're talking about pure production, LSU has been doing that for a long time.
Yeah, I think they said it was one of those things of they're trying to get back to how Texas used to be.
Right.
But then, of course, the fans take it and they're like, what are the real DBU? And the players are like, we're not saying that. But, they take it. So you're an AP Top 25 voter.
Yes.
What's your process for ranking? Because that's a ton of football teams to rank. How do you do that?
Yeah, there's no,
when do you start?
I'm assuming you're not watching all the games.
Or do you?
Well, I was actually, this time the polls were due Tuesday morning
that's right.
because of Labor Day weekend, and I think I was up until 4 a.m. Putting it. I take it very seriously. I think there has always long been a concern and question about sports writers that don't watch the games. I think that's something that I want to come in. I want to be knowledgeable about the teams and what they did. So the wealth of knowledge that's out there now on the internet, you can go on YouTube and watch condensed versions of games. And if I have a question about a team, I want to go and look at it. Like Wisconsin, I jumped Wisconsin, I think 5 places because I was impressed with their offense. I I think with Wisconsin, they run a lot of the spread schemes that LSU's doing. Like people think of Wisconsin as the ground and pound I formation. They're not doing that anymore. They're in the shotgun and they're using Jonathan Taylor, who I think is probably one of the front runners to win the Heisman at running back. They're using him exactly how they should use him. You can run the run pass option and get the defense coming up and bringing in that 7th man, that 8th man. And when they used to be limited because they were in the eye, they can hit those passes. And they were running really well against South Florida and Texas's former coach, Charlie Strong, and they just blew them out of the water. So, like, I want to be able to look at every team in some capacity before I make my decision. And I don't want to be limited by what I voted the week before, especially in the preseason, because I didn't see any of the teams.
Right.
And I thought, okay, well, this is what I think that they're going to be based on their recruiting and their and I check S&P Plus and all these other metrics and my own kind of gut feeling on these teams. But whenever I see it, like I had Florida number 7 going in because I just thought, they showed a lot. Dan Mullen is a good offensive mind. Right. It looked like Felipe Frank took the next step. And then when they played Miami, it was the worst game I'd ever seen anybody play. Yeah. And it wasn't because it was too early. They started their camp earlier than everybody else. They had just as much practice time. Yeah. And I was like, well, do I think that Florida is better than these teams? And I kept saying no, 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 and then I'd place them where I did. So I take it. I try and be as analytical as possible, read as much as possible, and then not be so stern based upon what I voted the week before.
When you're looking at games, especially kind of early on, week 1, week 2, are there like some red flags that you kind of look for, especially when teams are playing, your Louisiana Techs, your Georgia Southerns, to where they're still going to win the game, but like there's something that makes you want to drop them down?
Well, see, like it all evens itself out kind of toward the end of the season once you see teams in conference play. And you mentioned how like a lot of the Big 12 teams have played FCS as well. At a certain point, you say, okay, did they do what they were supposed to do? Did they, like LSU, beat Georgia Southern 55-3? They exceeded what they were supposed to do. And that's not an FCS team. That's a 10-3 Sun Belt team that almost won their conference last year. But, did Baylor do what it was supposed to do? Did Iowa State do what it was supposed to do? No, they did not. Iowa State nearly lost to Northern Iowa. So that reassesses kind of your thought process on them. And you're like, all right, well, I thought they would be farther ahead than they are now. So usually you ask yourself the question whenever they're a much more talented team on the other side, did they do what they were supposed to do?
Yeah. So one of the questions that I had written here that I think would be a good one to jump in here is, what do you think LSU is going to have to do if they're going to win this one?
I think LSU has to play clean on offense. They proved that they could do that last week. They were very efficient in the red zone. All 7 of their red zone appearances, they scored touchdowns. That was a big issue for them last year. And Ed Orgeron even admitted sometimes that they would keep the field goal in their back pocket because they had Cole Tracy, who nearly won the Lou Groza Award last year just because he was such a fine kicker. But the run-pass option has given them that extra tool in the red zone where it keeps the defense accountable. So many people, from David Pollack on ESPN and somewhere else, and other people, have called the RPOs cheating because you're reading the offensive line, and if they read run, linebackers are coming forward, safeties are coming forward, and then all of a sudden the slant pass comes over your head and it's a touchdown. So that's a big thing. That needs to work against Texas. They need to, and the offensive line is actually the biggest story for LSU on offense because last year they ranked outside the 100th ranking in sacks allowed, and they're still unproven there. Sadiq Charles, their starting left tackle, did not play last week. Left guard is still a big question. Adrian McGee started some last year, but has he improved the way that he needs to? Chason Hines is a guy that missed all of the offseason with the knee surgery. He's going to be trying to get some playing time there. The only consistent guys that they had all of last season who played well and played in every game was their center, Lloyd Cushenberry, and their right guard, Damian Lewis. That's really it. So the rest of that needed to step up and take accountability and improve because Joe Burrow needs to have the time, even if it is a fast-paced offense like they've got now. So The question is how well can they handle the pass rush of Texas? And if they can do that, they'll win this game.
All right, I just got a couple more questions. First of all, we saw Bevo versus Uga in the Sugar Bowl. That wasn't quite a fair fight. Who would win in a fight if Bevo and Mike the Tiger went against each other?
Tigers, man. So there's actually, so y'all know the Tigers on campus across the street from Tiger Stadium. Yeah. When I first got hired, I went over to see the Tiger. Of course,
right? Of course,
I gotta go see the Tiger. Let's go see this thing. Yeah. So I'm looking in this. It's a multi-million-dollar facility. It's beautiful, and I'm walking, and I see the Tiger, and he's just walking. It's massive. It's massive. And I turn around and I'm talking to my friend, and then I look back and I was like, where'd Mike go? And then like in the bushes, it's staring at me, just looking at me. I was like, that thing, I'd be dead if I was out there. Well, we know why this thing is the king of the jungle right now. So I think Tiger would be picked over several animals.
I'm not gonna lie, I love the Tigers. I think it's one of the coolest mascots, and the fact that they have a live tiger there is just such a cool extra factor. All right, so last question. Most important question: who wins the game? I mean, you're on a Texas show. You say LSU, and we cut this.
Oh, okay.
I'm
well,
just kidding.
you might need to cut the camera because I put in my pick for the Advocate already. I think the score is going to be 27-24. That's right around where the over/under is, I think.
Yeah.
I do think that this is going to come down to the crucial turnover. I think LSU is the one that's going to force that. I think Sam Ehlinger is a good quarterback. I think looking at Louisiana Tech last week, he still made some throws that Tech probably should have intercepted. And I think him running the ball, LSU has been good at forcing fumbles. I don't know if that's where it's going to come from, but I think the turnover is going to come from LSU in this game. But it's going to be close.
Yeah.
And I think the home field advantage is going to be a definite factor. This is going to be a game that will be bigger than Notre Dame was a couple of years ago. It's going to be as big as when Ohio State came to town in 2006, and probably better because I think people realize the kind of team Texas had was not the championship team the year before. This will be an environment like Texas hasn't seen yet because people are so ready around here for the Longhorns to be actually back. And this kind of test is right at the core of everything. And I know Tom Herman is one of those coaches who tries to get his players up for the big ones.
Yeah.
And I think they know for sure how important this game is to the program and its success moving forward.
Yeah. Well, Brooks, thanks for joining us.
Always, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Great having you on. Back in the studio.
It's good to be back.
Stick around. Coming up next, Robert and I have all the predictions for Week 2 of college football.